It's funny, the things you notice when your world shrinks. When I was younger, a history professor lecturing to halls of bright young faces, my world was vast, full of ideas, debates, and the grand sweep of centuries. Hiss it. Now, at 72, my world is this three-story brownstone, its quiet rooms filled with the ghosts of a life well lived. And for the past 6 months, my world had included Kelly. Her face, I remember thinking when the agency first sent her, was as open and sweet as a spring morning. She had kind eyes, a ready smile, and hands that were surprisingly strong and gentle as she helped me navigate the polished hardwood floors that had become a bit of a treacherous sea since my fall. But the world, I've learned, is no less dangerous for being small. In fact, the dangers just get closer. They have a key to your front door. They pour your afternoon tea. They look at you with those sweet, kind eyes and lie. I'm watching the local evening news now. The anchor, a man with impossibly white teeth, is standing in front of a grim-looking warehouse down by the port. Police lights flash silently on the screen, painting the scene in pulses of red and blue. He's talking about a major bust, one of the city's largest stolen goods operations, dismantled in a single, swift raid. He mentions a breakthrough, a tip from a source that led them right to the heart of the network. I take a slow sip of my tea, the warmth of the porcelain, a small solid comfort in my hands. The tracker in my grandmother's necklace, or rather the worthless replica of my grandmother's necklace, stopped broadcasting from that exact location 3 hours ago. Kelly thinks she's in a holding cell, a small-time thief caught in a big net. She has no idea that she wasn't the catch, she was the bait. And I, the frail old woman she thought she was so clever to be robbing blind, was the one holding the fishing rod. It wasn't about revenge when this all started, but sitting here, watching the fruits of my quiet, meticulous labor, I have to admit, it is now, and it is deeply, deeply satisfying. It began, as these things often do, with something small enough to be deniable, a $20 bill. I've never been careless with money, a habit instilled by a Depression-era mother who could account for every last penny. I kept a small amount of cash in a side pocket of my purse for the farmer's market. I knew, with the certainty of long habit, that I'd had 3 20s and a 10 in there. That Tuesday, after Kelly had been with me for about a month, I opened it to find only 1 20 and the 10. A little prickle of unease, nothing more. I told myself I must have been mistaken. I was getting older. After all, perhaps I'd used it and forgotten. It's a terrible thing when you start to second-guess your own mind. It's a quiet, creeping fog that blurs the edges of your certainty, and it's the perfect environment for a predator to thrive. But my mind, despite my bulky hip, is still sharp. It's the mind of a historian, trained to see patterns, to question narratives, to connect disparate facts. So I set a small, silent test. The following week, I very deliberately placed 4 $20 bills in the same pocket. I even took a photo of them with my phone, feeling a bit foolish, a bit clandestine. I left my purse on the hall table, while Kelly helped me with my physical therapy exercises in the living room. She was so attentive that day, her voice full of encouragement. Such a good girl, I thought, and a wave of shame washed over me for my suspicion. Later that evening, long after she'd gone home, I checked. 3 20s. My heart didn't race. It didn't pound. It just sank, a cold, heavy stone dropping into the pit of my stomach. It wasn't the money. $20 is nothing. It was the violation, the quiet, smiling betrayal, the knowledge that the sweet face was a mask, and behind it was a common thief. For a week I did nothing. I watched her. I watched her move through my home, dusting the frames of photos of my late husband, Robert, his handsome uniformed face smiling out from the past. I watched her handle the books in my library, her fingers brushing over leather-bound volumes that had been in my family for a century, and every smile, every kind word she offered me, was tainted. It was a performance. I was no longer a person to her, I was a resource, a mark. The denial was a powerful sedative. Maybe it's a one-time thing, I told myself. Maybe she's in some kind of trouble. The excuses we make for people are really just excuses we make for ourselves to delay the pain of facing the truth. The truth came for me about 2 weeks later. It came in the form of two empty spots on my dining room sideboard. For 40 years, a pair of silver candlesticks had stood there. They weren't exceptionally valuable in a monetary sense, but they were my mother's. I could remember her polishing them every Saturday, the smell of the silver polish and the soft rasp of the cloth, a fixed part of my childhood memories. They were heavy, ornate, and deeply irreplaceably mine, and they were gone. I didn't ask Kelly about them. I knew what she would say. She would feign surprise, concern. She would help me look for them, her face a perfect mask of sympathy. She would suggest that maybe I had misplaced them, her voice full of gentle pity for the confused old woman she thought I was. The thought of playing out that charade, of listening to her lies while the truth screamed in my head, made me physically ill. That was the moment the fog of denial burned away, replaced by the cold, clear air of reality. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This wasn't a cry for help. This was a campaign. I was being dismantled, piece by piece, by the woman I paid to care for me. I went to bed that night, and for the first time since Robert died, I locked my bedroom door. I lay in the dark, not with fear, but with a slow-burning anger that felt like a banked fire, waiting for oxygen. The betrayal was complete. Now the fallout would begin. The days that followed the disappearance of the candlesticks were a unique kind of hell. It was the quiet, internal kind. On the surface, nothing had changed. Kelly still arrived at 9 a.m. sharp, her smile as bright as ever. She still made my tea just the way I liked it, with a splash of milk and no sugar. We still went through the motions of our day, exercises, a light lunch, perhaps a game of cards in the afternoon. But for me, the very air in my own home had changed. It was thick with unspoken words, with my silent, screaming knowledge of her deceit. Every touch of her hand on my arm felt like a violation. Every solicitous question, "Are you comfortable, Maura? Do you need anything?" felt like an insult. I felt profoundly, terribly alone. Who could I tell? My children are scattered across the country, busy with their own lives. A phone call saying, "I think my caregiver is stealing from me," would only cause them panic and worry. They would insist I move into an assisted living facility, a sterile beige box where I would be safe, but where I would cease to be myself. They see me as fragile, someone to be protected, not as the woman who chaired a university department and faced down academic sharks for 30 years. To them, my home with its 3 floors of memories is a liability, not the fortress of my soul. And what could I say to the agency? That I had a feeling, that $20 and a pair of candlesticks were missing. They would launch a full investigation, which meant they would ask Kelly if she did it. She would say no, her sweet face the very picture of wounded innocence. They would find no proof. It would be my word, the word of an old woman who recently had a fall, who might be confused against hers. They might, at best, assign me a new caregiver, but the doubt would linger. Was I the problem? Am I becoming unreliable? That was a humiliation I was unwilling to endure. It wasn't about revenge then. It was about survival. About protecting not just my property, but my credibility, my autonomy, my own sense of self. My mind kept drifting back to Robert. My husband was a detective for 30 years. He was a quiet, methodical man who saw the world in patterns and puzzles. Our house was filled not just with love, but with his stories from the force. He'd come home, sink into his worn leather armchair, and tell me about his cases. He never talked about the violence, but about the craft, the art of the long game. I remember one case in particular, a string of burglaries in a wealthy neighborhood. The thief was like a ghost. No forced entry, no witnesses, just small valuable things vanishing from houses. The other cops were chasing their tails, running down every petty criminal in the city. But Robert was patient. He told me, "Maura, you don't catch the rat by chasing it. You find what it wants, you leave it some cheese, and you follow it back to the nest. The real crime is never the rat. It's the nest it serves. He spent weeks just watching, observing the patterns of life in that neighborhood. The landscapers, the pool cleaners, the delivery drivers. He eventually figured out it was one of the caterers, a man who worked high-end parties, who was scoping the houses and selling the information. He didn't just want the burglar. He wanted the whole operation, and he got them. All of them. Lying in bed, the memory of his voice was so clear, it was as if he were sitting in the armchair across the room. Follow it back to the nest. The thought settled in my mind, not as an idea, but as an instruction. Kelly wasn't just a thief. The way she operated was too smooth, too confident. The missing cash was a test of my awareness. The candlesticks were a test of my response. She was probing my defenses, seeing how far she could go. This wasn't the work of a desperate amateur. This was professional. And if it was professional, she wasn't working alone. She was a rat, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that she was scouting for a much larger prize. My grandmother's jewelry. It wasn't a vast collection, but it was significant, and at its heart was the necklace. My grandmother, Eleanor, was a formidable woman, a survivor of an era that tried its best to keep women small. She'd worn that necklace to her own wedding. It was an old European cut diamond, nearly 5 carats, surrounded by a spray of smaller stones, set in platinum. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was a symbol of our family's resilience. She gave it to me on my 21st birthday. I remember the weight of it in my hand, the feel of the cool, heavy platinum chain. She'd closed my fingers around it and said, "Maura, this isn't for showing off. This is security. This is independence. In this world, a woman needs to have her own, something no one can take from her." I hadn't thought about that day in years, but now her words echoed Robert's. Something no one can take from her. Kelly hadn't just stolen my silver, she was threatening my history, my grandmother's legacy, the very symbol of my independence. The catalyst came on a Thursday. I was sitting in the parlor, reading. Kelly was dusting, humming a cheerful little tune. The humming stopped. I looked up over the top of my book. She was standing in front of the small glass-fronted cabinet where I kept the jewelry I didn't store at the bank. Her back was to me, but I could see her reflection in the polished wood of the grandfather clock. She was staring at the necklace, which I had taken out to wear to a university fundraiser the previous week and hadn't yet returned to the vault. The look on her face was not one of admiration. It was one of calculation, of hunger. It was the most predatory expression I had ever seen on a human being. She must have felt my eyes on her, because she startled and turned, that sweet smile snapping back into place like a rubber band. "Oh, Maura, I was just admiring your necklace," she said, her voice a little too bright. "It's absolutely breathtaking. It must be worth a fortune." I kept my face neutral, a skill honed by decades of enduring tedious faculty meetings. "It has sentimental value," I said quietly. She wasn't deterred. "Have you had it appraised recently?"
For insurance?
"With things the way they are, you can't be too careful." The audacity of it was stunning. The thief advising me on how to protect myself from theft. It was a brazen piece of theater, and it confirmed everything. She was assessing its value. She was planning. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in Robert's armchair, the leather cool against my skin, and felt the anger I'd been suppressing finally ignite. It wasn't a hot, flashing rage. It was a cold, quiet, industrial-grade fury. It burned away the last of my fear, the last of my hesitation. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the candlesticks. It wasn't even about the necklace anymore. It was about the look on her face, the casual, dismissive greed, the assumption that I was a helpless old woman, a relic to be plundered. I thought about another time I had been so profoundly underestimated. Years ago, when I was a junior professor, I had spent 2 years on a piece of original research about the economic role of women in medieval guilds. I shared my preliminary findings with a senior colleague, a man named Dr. Alistair Finch. He was charming, avuncular, and full of praise for my work. 2 months later, he published a paper under his own name, using my data, my thesis, my conclusions. When I confronted him, he patted my hand and told me I was being emotional, that I had misunderstood, that my work had simply inspired a new direction in his own. The university, predictably, sided with him. I was devastated, but I didn't quit. I spent the next year gathering every piece of evidence I had. My research notes dated a year before his, letters to other academics discussing my thesis, library records of the obscure texts only I had consulted. I didn't go to the dean. I went to the board of trustees and the editor of the historical journal that published his paper. I laid out my case calmly, factually, and relentlessly. Finch was forced to issue a retraction. His career never recovered. I learned a valuable lesson then. You don't win by yelling. You win by being smarter, more patient and more prepared than your enemy. Sitting there in the dark, the memory of Alistair Finch's stunned, defeated face gave me a strange sense of comfort. I had done it before. I would do it again. Kelly, like Finch, had made the fatal mistake of seeing my quiet nature as weakness. She saw an old woman. She didn't see the historian, the strategist, the survivor. She didn't see Robert's wife or Eleanor's granddaughter. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. It was audacious, complicated, and more than a little dangerous. It was also, I knew, perfect. I would not be a victim. I would not be a mark. I would be the historian of Kelly's downfall, and I would document every single step. Robert's words echoed in my mind. It was time to set out the cheese. But my cheese would be made of cubic zirconia and glass, and it would have a sting in its tail. My plan had begun to form. The first step in any successful campaign is reconnaissance. I am a historian, after all. Research is in my blood. I spent the next 2 days in my library, not with my beloved books on the Carolingian Renaissance, but with my laptop. My search history would have looked rather peculiar for a woman of my age. Miniature GPS tracking devices, legality of tracking stolen property, high-quality cubic zirconia versus diamond, and private investigation laws for civilians. The internet is a marvel. It's the Library of Alexandria and the world's biggest back-alley market, all rolled into one. I learned that the technology had become astonishingly small. Trackers, no bigger than a grain of rice, could be bought easily. Their legality was a gray area, but the prevailing wisdom seemed to be that tracking your own property was generally permissible. The key was what you did with the information. Handing it over to the police was one thing, engaging in your own brand of vigilante justice was another. I had no intention of confronting Kelly myself. My plan was far more elegant. I wouldn't be the fist, I would be the invisible hand that guided it. My greatest challenge was the replicas. They couldn't just be good, they had to be perfect. They had to withstand a thief's close scrutiny. They had to feel right, weigh right, and catch the light in just the same way. This was not a job for some mall kiosk or an online clearinghouse. This required an artist, a craftsman of the old school. This required Mr. Abram. Isaac Abram's jewelry shop is a relic from another time. It's a narrow, dark wooded space on a quiet side street, smelling of polish and old velvet. His family had been jewelers in this city for 3 generations. Mr. Abram himself was a small, neat man in his late 70s, with eyes magnified by thick glasses that seemed to see not just the carats of a stone, but its history. He had repaired my mother's watch, reset the stone in my engagement ring, and knew every significant piece my family owned. More importantly, he was a man of absolute, unshakable discretion. I made an appointment. I didn't bring the jewelry with me. That would have been too risky. Instead, I brought the most recent insurance appraisal, which included high-resolution photographs and detailed specifications of each piece, the necklace, a matching pair of earrings, and a large diamond brooch my father had given my mother. I sat in the small private viewing room at the back of his shop. The silence was thick, broken only by the ticking of a beautiful skeleton clock on his desk. I told him everything. I started with the missing $20 and ended with the predatory look in Kelly's eyes. As I spoke, His expression shifted from polite attentiveness to sharp, focused concern. When I finished, he took off his glasses and polished them slowly with a silk handkerchief. "The world is full of hyenas, Mara," he said, his voice quiet but hard. "And they prey on those they believe to be solitary, easy targets. They see grace and assume frailty." He looked at me, his gaze direct. "What you are describing is not petty theft. It is a reconnaissance mission. This girl, this Kelly, is a scout." The validation was like a balm on a raw wound. He didn't doubt me. He didn't think I was a confused old woman. He saw the pattern, just as I had. Then I laid out my plan. The replicas. The trackers. His eyebrows shot up over the rim of his glasses. He was silent for a full minute, studying the photographs of my jewelry. "To make a convincing replica of the necklace, the cut of that center stone is antique. It's not a modern brilliant cut. It refracts light differently. A standard cubic zirconia will be obvious to anyone who knows what they're looking for." My heart sank. "So it can't be done." He smiled, a rare thin smile. "I did not say that. I said a standard one wouldn't work. We would need to have the zirconia custom cut. Expensive. And embedding the tracker, we would need to design the platinum setting with a hidden compartment. It would have to be perfectly balanced, or the weight would be wrong. It is a challenge." He put his glasses back on and leaned forward. "It is a wonderful challenge." A strange sense of camaraderie filled the small room. We were two old artisans, preparing to counter a new, uglier world with the weapons of our own trade, patience, precision, and an intimate knowledge of our craft. He told me a story then, about a young apprentice he had taken on years ago. A gifted boy, whom he had treated like a son. The boy had learned all of his techniques, then had secretly started his own business on the side, using Mr. Abrams' designs and undercutting his prices. It wasn't the money that had hurt him, he said, but the breach of trust, the way the boy had used his kindness as a tool against him. I understood completely. We were members of the same, unwilling club. He agreed to do the work. It would take a few weeks. He would source the stones himself, oversee the cutting, and craft the settings in his private workshop. "They will be museum-quality fakes, Mora," he promised. "Worthless, but indistinguishable from the real thing to anyone short of a certified gemologist with a lupe." I left his shop feeling lighter than I had in months. I had an ally. My secret was no longer a solitary burden, but an ally wasn't enough. My plan required a final, crucial piece. I needed the law on my side, but I needed them on my terms. I couldn't just walk into a police station with a wild story about a future crime. They would dismiss me out of hand. I needed to lay the groundwork. I needed to find my Robert. My late husband had always said that in any large organization, you find the person who actually does the work, not the captain in the corner office, but the detective with the worn-out shoes and the overflowing caseload. After a few hours of searching online news archives and public records, I found my man, Detective David Harding, Property Crimes Division. He had a solid record of closing cases, but a string of quotes in news articles painted a picture of a man who was jaded, overworked, and deeply cynical. He was perfect. He wouldn't be swayed by charm or sentiment. He would only be swayed by one thing: evidence. I didn't call him about a theft. I called his desk and scheduled a non-emergency consultation. I said I was an elderly woman living alone and wanted to speak to an officer about home security. It was the sort of thing they did as community outreach. It was boring, routine, and would put me on his radar without raising any alarms. A week later, I sat across from him in a sterile beige interview room at the precinct. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 40s, with tired eyes and a suit that looked like it had been slept in. He was polite, but his attention was clearly elsewhere, his gaze drifting towards the mountain of files on his desk. He went through a standard checklist. Did I have deadbolts? A security system? Did I keep my valuables in a safe? He handed me a pamphlet with a picture of a smiling, silver-haired couple on the front. Home security for seniors. I listened patiently. I nodded. I took the pamphlet. I could feel his dismissal, his gentle impatience. I was just another nervous old lady wasting his time. As I was getting ready to leave, I paused at the door. "There is one more thing, detective," I said, my voice quiet. "I have some heirloom jewelry, things of great sentimental value. I worry about them specifically." He gave me a weary smile. "Get a safe deposit box, ma'am. It's the only way to be 100% sure." "I have one," I said. "But one piece, a necklace. I sometimes wear it for special occasions. It was my grandmother's." "Then be careful," he said, his hand already reaching for the top file on his desk. He was done with me. "It's just, I have a new caregiver," I said, planting the seed. "She seems like a very sweet girl." But I let the sentence hang there. He finally looked at me, a flicker of genuine interest in his tired eyes. He'd heard this story before, the helpful caregiver, the missing heirlooms. "Do you have any reason to suspect her of anything?" he asked, his voice shifting into a more professional, cautious tone. This was the critical moment. I couldn't lie, but I couldn't reveal my plan. "No, of course not," I said, forcing a slightly flustered, self-deprecating laugh. "It's just me being a silly old woman. You know how it is, you start to worry about everything." I had played his stereotype of me right back at him. I could see the tension leave his shoulders. I was back in the box he'd put me in. "Well, just be smart," he said, standing up to show me out. "Don't leave valuable things lying around. Trust your gut, but don't let your imagination run away with you." He handed me his card. "If you ever have a real reason to be concerned, not just a feeling, give me a call." "Thank you, detective," I said, taking the card. "You've put my mind at ease." It was a perfect lie. I walked out of the police station feeling a grim sense of accomplishment. I had my craftsman, I had my unwitting lawman. All the pieces were being moved into place on the board. Now all I had to do was wait for Mr. Abram to finish forging the bait. 2 weeks later, Mr. Abram called. "The cheese is ready," was all he said. The day was overcast and gray, a perfect mirror of my mood, a somber mix of anxiety and anticipation. I arranged for Kelly to have the afternoon off, telling her I had a doctor's appointment. My real appointment was with my bank's safe deposit vault, and then with Mr. Abram. The first stop was the bank. The vault was cold, silent, and imposing. I took out my grandmother's necklace, the brooch, and the earrings, the real ones. In the harsh fluorescent light, the diamonds seemed to pulse with a cold, pure fire. I held the necklace in my hand one last time, its familiar weight a comfort. "This is security. This is independence." My grandmother's voice was a whisper in my memory. I placed them, along with my mother's real silver, into the cold metal box and locked them away. I was securing my past so I could fight for my future. Mr. Abram's shop was a haven of warmth and quiet purpose. He laid the replicas out on a black velvet cloth. I gasped. They were perfect, absolutely, breathtakingly perfect. The replica necklace didn't have the soul of the real one. I could feel the difference, the subtle lack of history, but to the eye, it was flawless. The custom-cut zirconia mimicked the antique faceting of the original diamond, scattering the light with an almost identical fire. The platinum-plated setting had the same weight, the same intricate filigree. "The tracker is here," he said, pointing with a pair of tweezers to a tiny seam in the bezel setting of the largest stone. "It's dormant. You activate it with an app on your phone when you're ready. The battery will last for 72 hours of continuous broadcasting once activated." He showed me the app, a simple map, a button that said "Activate." He had even created identical velvet-lined boxes for them, slightly aged to match the originals. I paid him for his work, the cost significant but, in my mind, a worthy investment. I tried to express the depth of my gratitude, but he just patted my hand. "Mora, there is no greater pleasure for an old craftsman than to see his skills used for a noble purpose. Just be careful." That evening I performed the switch. I placed the replica boxes in the glass-fronted cabinet in the parlor, in the exact arrangement the real ones had occupied. I put the replica brooch on the mantelpiece. I left the replica necklace out on my dressing table, draped over a small porcelain tray, as if I had just taken it off. It was a piece of stagecraft, and the curtain was about to rise. The next morning, when Kelly arrived, I was wearing the necklace. I saw her eyes go to it immediately. Just a flicker, a momentary widening, before her professional smile took over. "Good morning, Maura. Oh my, you're looking glamorous today. I had a fundraiser for the university library last night," I said, touching the necklace lightly. It felt cold against my skin, a beautiful lie. "I'm thinking of getting it reappraised. My insurance company is becoming quite insistent about updating the valuations on my policies." I watched her face carefully. It was a masterclass in control, but I saw it. A flash of pure, unadulterated greed in her eyes, quickly masked by a look of polite interest. The hook was baited. Now, I just had to wait for the bite. The waiting was the hardest part. My house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage. I was both director and lead actor in a tense, silent play. I had to maintain my role as the slightly frail, trusting old woman, while every nerve in my body screamed with awareness of the predator in my midst. I started documenting everything with a meticulousness that would have made Robert proud. I kept a small coded journal, noting Kelly's hours, her moods, any unusual questions she asked. I also made a new investment, a small discreet security camera, disguised as a digital clock, which I placed on the mantelpiece in the parlor. I knew the footage might not be admissible in court, depending on audio recording laws in my state, but this wasn't for the court, this was for me. It was my validation, my secret window into her duplicity. The footage was chilling. I would watch it at night, after she'd left, huddled in my study with my tablet. I saw her, when she thought I was napping, approach the jewelry cabinet. She wouldn't touch it, she was too smart for that. But she would stand there, staring. One afternoon, I saw her take out her phone and quickly, furtively, take pictures of the pieces inside. She was sending the photos to someone, her buyer, her fence, the nest. Her behavior toward me became cloyingly sweet. She started bringing me little gifts, a pastry from a bakery she liked, a magazine she thought I'd enjoy. It was the classic overcompensation of the guilty. She complimented me constantly, her voice dripping with a synthetic honey that made my teeth ache. "That color brings out your eyes, Maura. You're looking so much stronger today, Maura." She was grooming me, lulling me, reinforcing her persona as the devoted caregiver, ensuring that when the time came, no one would ever suspect her. I accepted her compliments and her pastries with a gentle, grateful smile, playing my part to perfection. Inside, the cold fire of my anger burned steadily. I saw the tremor in her hand one afternoon as she poured my tea. I saw the way her eyes kept darting toward the jewelry cabinet. She was getting close. The pressure was building. I decided to give her a little push. I made an appointment with the appraiser for next Friday. I announced one morning, as if making casual conversation. "Mr. Abram is sending someone over. It's such a hassle, but I suppose it's for the best." That was the key. I had given her a deadline. If she was going to act, she had to act before the fictional appraiser arrived and discovered the fakes. I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes, quickly suppressed. She had to make her move. And she had to do it soon. The day came a week before the appraisal. It was a Tuesday. I knew it would be that day. There was a new tension in her, a coiled spring energy that was palpable. I started the day by complaining of a headache and a bit of a chill. "I think I might have caught a bit of a bug, Kelly," I said, my voice deliberately weak. "I'm just going to take one of my stronger pain pills and lie down for a few hours. Would you mind just tidying up downstairs?" "Of course not, Maura," she said, her voice overflowing with concern. She helped me to my room, drew the curtains, and laid a cool cloth on my forehead. "You just rest. I'll be as quiet as a mouse." Her performance was flawless. I lay in my bed, but I wasn't resting. I had my phone in my hand under the covers. On the screen was the live feed from the camera in the parlor. I watched her tidy up, moving around the room, dusting, straightening cushions. It was agonizing. For almost an hour, she did nothing but her job. A sliver of doubt entered my mind. Had I misjudged her? Was this all in my head? And then she stopped. She stood in the center of the room, perfectly still, listening. She was listening for any sound from upstairs. Hearing nothing, she moved. There was no hesitation now. She walked directly to my dressing table, her movements swift and precise. She picked up the replica necklace. She didn't even look at it. She just curled her fingers around it and slipped it into the pocket of her slacks. It was done. The theft had occurred. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum against my ribs, but it was a rhythm of triumph, not fear. She stayed for another hour, finishing her chores, her demeanor perfectly normal. Then she came to my door and knocked softly. "Mora, I'm heading out now. Is there anything else you need?" "No, thank you, Kelly," I called out, my voice thick with fake sleepiness. "I'll see you tomorrow. Feel better," she said. And then she was gone. The moment I heard the front door click shut, I was out of bed. The necklace was gone from my dressing table. I went to my phone and opened the tracking app. My finger hovered over the red button. Activate. I pressed it. On the map of the city, a small blue dot appeared, pulsing gently over the address of my own home. My plan was in motion. Kelly had taken the bait, and now I would follow the rat back to her nest. The power shift was not a gradual incline. It was a seismic jolt, a tectonic plate of my life, sliding into a new and irreversible position. For months I had been the one who was watched, probed, and assessed. Now the roles were reversed. I was the watcher. Kelly, so confident in her deception, had no idea she had just become the most predictable person in the city. Her greed was a leash, and I was holding the end of it. I sat in Robert's leather armchair, my tablet propped on the ottoman in front of me. The little blue dot on the screen was my sole focus. For the first 20 minutes it remained stationary at my address. I imagined her walking to the bus stop, waiting, her heart probably thumping with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The stolen necklace would feel heavy in her pocket, a talisman of her new, richer life. Then the dot began to move. It traveled east, along the main bus route, a slow and steady crawl across the digital map. My first call was not to 911. It was to the direct line on the business card I had. So carefully preserved, Detective Harding's. He answered on the third ring, his voice gruff and impatient. "Harding, Detective Harding, this is Mora Abernathy," I said, my voice calm and even. I had rehearsed this. There was a pause, a sigh on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Abernathy, is this about home security again? I'm in the middle of something." The dismissal was back, thick and patronizing. He was picturing a lonely old woman calling him for a chat. "No, detective," I said, cutting through his annoyance with a blade of pure fact. "This is about a grand larceny. My grandmother's diamond necklace, the one I mentioned to you, was just stolen from my home. The primary suspect is my caregiver, Kelly Porter, who just left my house." Another sigh. "Ma'am, are you sure? Did you see her take it?" "No," I said. "I don't need to, because I know exactly where she is, and I know exactly where my necklace is." The line went silent. The quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer impatient. It was attentive. "What do you mean, you know where it is?" he asked, his voice now stripped of all condescension. It was the voice of a cop. "Before it was stolen," I said, choosing my words with care. "I had a GPS tracker, smaller than a grain of rice, embedded in the setting. It's active. I'm watching it move across the city on a map right now. As we speak, my necklace is heading south on 12th Street, approaching the intersection with Market." The silence that followed was profound. I could hear the faint sounds of the squad room in the background, phones ringing, distant chatter. But in that silence I felt the entire dynamic between us shift. I was no longer a silly, paranoid old woman. I was a credible source. I was evidence. "Send me the link," Harding said, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "Text it to this number right now. And ma'am, Mrs. Abernathy, do not do anything else. Do not call her. Do not leave your house. Do you understand?" "Perfectly, detective," I said, and ended the call. I texted him the tracking link. For the next hour I was a statue in that armchair, my world reduced to a glowing screen. I watched the blue dot, my proxy, my silent avenger, snake its way through the city. It left the residential areas, moving into a gritty, industrial part of town I hadn't visited in years. The bus route ended, and the dot began to move on foot, turning down a series of smaller, grittier streets. It was a part of the city that respectable people avoided, a place of shuttered factories and graffiti-scarred brickwork. I narrated its journey to myself in a low whisper, imagining Kelly's state of mind, the triumph she must be feeling, the belief that she had pulled it off, the fool. Then the dot stopped. It stopped at a large rust-colored warehouse by the old port. The building was set back from the street, surrounded by a high chain-link fence. According to the satellite view on the map, it was officially derelict. My phone rang. It was Harding. His voice was completely different. It was electric. "Mora," he said, and the use of my first name was not a familiarity of disrespect, but of partnership. "Mora, are you seeing this? The location where your tracker stopped. A warehouse on Dock Street," I said calmly. "That's not just any warehouse," he said, and I could hear the excitement, the thrill of the hunt in his voice. That place belongs to a holding company we've long suspected is a front for Silas Croft." The name meant nothing to me. Who is Silas Croft? He's the king, the biggest fence for high-end stolen goods on the entire eastern seaboard. Art, jewelry, antiques. If it's stolen from a wealthy home within 500 miles, it passes through his hands. We've been trying to get inside that operation for 2 years. 2 years. We've had undercover guys try to get in, informants, everything. But Croft is insulated. He's careful. He only deals with a trusted network of thieves. We've never been able to get a warrant. We've never had probable cause to get past that front door. He paused, and I could practically hear the grin forming on his face. Until now, a live tracker on a piece of recently stolen property, broadcasting from inside his building. "Mora, you just gave us the keys to the kingdom. You just handed us Silas Croft on a silver platter." I leaned back in the chair, the old leather creaking in the quiet room. The family exodus he spoke of, the community of criminals, was about to be forcibly evicted, and the agent of that eviction was a piece of glass and metal I'd had made, all because someone had stolen my mother's candlesticks. "What happens now, detective?" I asked. "Now," he said, his voice buzzing with energy, "you sit tight and turn on the 10 o'clock news. You're about to see a hornet's nest get kicked over. There is a unique and terrible power in watching a reckoning you have orchestrated unfold on television. It feels both intimate and distant, like watching a home movie of someone else's war." I didn't go to the raid. Detective Harding had been very clear about that. My role was done. I was the catalyst, not the confrontation. So I sat, a fresh cup of tea in my hands, and watched the local news. The first reports were breathless. A massive police presence converging on the port district. Live helicopter shots showed a swarm of dark vehicles surrounding the warehouse, tactical officers in full gear, moving with silent, terrifying efficiency. They didn't knock. They used a battering ram on the steel door, a percussive thump that the news helicopter's microphone picked up clearly. Then came the ground-level shots. The reporter, the same man with the impossibly white teeth, was speaking in hushed, excited tones as the police brought people out in handcuffs. First a few rough-looking men, then a man in a sharp suit who looked utterly stunned. Silas Croft, the on-screen graphic identified him. He looked like an accountant, not a crime lord. But it was the next person they brought out that made me lean forward. It was Kelly. Her face, usually so sweet and composed, was a mask of pure, uncomprehending terror. Her eyes were wide, darting back and forth as the reality of her situation crashed down upon her. The flashing lights, the shouting officers, the cold steel of the handcuffs. She looked small and pathetic. She had walked into that warehouse expecting a payday, a triumphant conclusion to her clever little crime. Instead, she had walked directly into the closing jaws of a trap she never even knew existed. She thought she was a player. She was just a pawn, and she had just been sacrificed. I felt a surge of something cold and clean and hard. It was the feeling of a slate being wiped clean. It was vindication. The news anchor was saying that an anonymous tip from a highly credible source had given police the probable cause they needed. They had found a treasure trove inside paintings stripped from their frames, antique furniture, and a vast collection of jewelry. He specifically mentioned that they had recovered a significant diamond necklace, believed to have been stolen in a home robbery just hours earlier. I almost laughed. That significant diamond necklace was a piece of custom-cut glass worth, at most, a few $100s. but it had been the key. The worthless, perfect key that unlocked a multi-million-dollar criminal enterprise. The next day, Detective Harding came to my house. He wasn't the same man I had met in the beige interview room. The weariness was gone, replaced by a deep, quiet respect. He looked at me not as an old woman, but as a peer, an unexpected colleague. "Mora," he said, standing in my parlor. He was holding a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside, nestled on a bed of tissue paper, was the replica necklace. It looked cheap and gaudy in the harsh light of day, a fraud exposed. "I believe this is yours." "Thank you, Detective," I said, taking the bag. "I've been a cop for 25 years," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "I've seen a lot of things, but I have never, ever seen anything like this. You took down Silas Croft with a piece of cubic zirconia and a $5 a month subscription service. The DA is ecstatic. The brass is thrilled. They're calling it the cleanest bust in a decade." He paused, his eyes finding the photograph of Robert on the mantelpiece. "Your husband, he was a detective in the 17th precinct, wasn't he? Rob Abernathy. I was a rookie when he retired. He was a legend, a smart, patient cop. He would have been damn proud of you." That was it. That was the moment of true victory. Not the sight of Kelly in handcuffs, not the news reports, but those words. The validation from Robert's world, from a man who understood the game. It was a connection to my husband, a final, shared victory over the kind of darkness he had fought his whole life. "We found these in the warehouse, too," he added, gesturing to a uniformed officer by the door, who brought in a carefully wrapped parcel. Inside were my mother's silver candlesticks. They were a little tarnished, but they were there. Solid, real. I ran a hand over the familiar ornate silver, and I finally felt like my home was my own again. The new reality had settled in. The ghosts of distrust had been exorcised, not by shouting or by anger, but by quiet, meticulous, and overwhelming competence. The board was cleared. The game was won. In the quiet that followed, I found my life settling into a new rhythm. It was a peaceful quiet, not the tense, watchful silence I had endured for months. The house felt lighter, the air cleaner. I hired a new caregiver, a stern but kind woman named Agnes, whose references I had vetted with the thoroughness of a counterintelligence agent. Detective Harding had even run a background check for me, off the record. A professional courtesy, he'd called it. Mr. Abram came to visit a week after the raid. I had returned his beautiful fraudulent necklace to him. He said he was going to put it in a display case in his private workshop, a memento. We sat in the parlor, the newly polished silver candlesticks gleaming on the sideboard, and we shared a small glass of sherry. We were two old soldiers, enjoying the peace after a successful campaign. "To the noble use of our skills," he said, raising his glass. "And to hyenas getting what they deserve," I replied, and we both smiled. I know this has been a long story, a winding path to get from a missing $20 bill to the downfall of a criminal kingpin, but it's my story, and telling it, sharing it like this, feels like the final piece of the puzzle, the last act of taking back my own narrative. For so long, Kelly's actions made me a victim in my own home. I felt powerless, invisible, dismissed. A silly old woman. It's a role that so many of us, as we get older, are expected to play. We are supposed to be gentle, to be quiet, to not make a fuss. We are supposed to fade into the background. But my grandmother taught me to have something of my own that no one could take. My husband taught me to follow the rat to the nest. And my own life has taught me that sometimes, the quietest people have the most formidable resolve. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the trust. It was about the sanctity of a home. It was about the profound arrogance of someone who looks at another human being and sees only an opportunity. Some of you might be thinking, was it right to set a trap? Shouldn't I have just fired her and called the police from the start? What was I supposed to do when the very people meant to help would have dismissed my concerns as the ramblings of old age? I ask you, when someone tries to steal not just your property, but your dignity, your peace of mind, and your sense of safety in the world. How far is too far to go to get it back? They say it shouldn't be about revenge, but I believe sometimes it has to be. Not a hot, angry revenge, but a cold, calculated, and deeply satisfying reclamation of justice. It wasn't about revenge until it was. Thank you for listening to my story. It means a great deal to share it, and to finally close this chapter of my life. If you've ever felt underestimated or dismissed, I hope my experience offers a little bit of strength. I would genuinely love to read your thoughts on my situation in the comments below. And if you found my story compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. It lets me know that my voice is being heard, and that, after all this, is a truly wonderful feeling.